Human potential. What exactly are we capable of as a species or as individuals? What are our limitations? And do we set limitations based on our own beliefs, society's beliefs, our upbringing? Today we focus on our capacity to maximize our energy, mindset, and productivity in both our professional and our personal lives. Joining me today is Parmees Yazdanyar, who is a speaker, author, high-performance trainer. But the list goes on, and so for better context, here's how she actually describes herself and what she does. With my background in integrative medicine, behavioral neuroscience, and positive psychology, I've combined the most relevant strategies from all three fields to create a three-pillar system that helps high achievers neuro-hack their way to improved energy, motivation, productivity, output, and overall quality of life. That is a mouthful. This is crazy. So welcome to Living Your Life with Lianne Laing, the podcast brought to you by Extension Marketing. And of course, as always, you can check out extensionmarketing.com for more information. That was a really fun intro to write. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have you. We actually had to postpone this a little bit because there were projects and things calling you back to LA and back to different places. This is, I think, a fascinating topic that is growing and that people are actually interested in understanding.
Absolutely.
It's probably shifted, I think, from what it would have been maybe 20 years ago.
Much.
When you were just a baby.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. The field has evolved quite a bit. And I mean, like you mentioned in my intro, I do kind of create my own definition of high performance. And what I've done with my background is that I've taken sources from both integrative medicine, so looking at how to maximize our energy, how to fuel better, how to manage stress, how to sleep, how to exercise, with certain strategies from positive psychology. So how to become more optimistic, how to become more resilient, how to actually, set goals and achieve them, and looking at the science of what do high performers do that kind of sets them apart from everybody else. And these aren't necessarily things that they're born with, but perhaps what have they changed in their environment, or what habits or practices have they embodied that have allowed them to shift up both personally and professionally.
I am so excited because I feel like after this, people are just going to feel energized. They're going to feel motivated to do something. And sometimes there's a spark needed. There's something that's kind of fueling this movement. And when you have someone like yourself doing it, first off, where did you get it from? Where did you do this shift? Where was it in your upbringing that this was something that you thought there's a possibility to do?
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that too as well, because I'm pretty young compared to many of the people in my field.
I was going to mention that a little further in, that you are, when you talk of a millennial, in the truest essence, this is you, very young, but already kind of worked their way in their field and have made a mark.
That's right.
Which which is nice to see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think just as individuals, we should always be thinking about what our potential is. I was just listening to a podcast on my way here, and they were saying, the more you surround yourself with people that push you to be a better version of yourself, the more you kind of try to fill that gap in wanting to be better. So I really do believe that your environment plays a crucial role. Now, you asked a little bit about my upbringing, and that's sometimes a question that kind of circles through my mind as well. I'm kind of first generation. My parents immigrated here actually as refugees in the 80s. They were both political refugees coming out of the Middle East. They came here with close to nothing, as many refugees would say, and they tried to build a life here after my brother and I were born, and tried to give us the best of what they could afford. And I think from a very young age, just seeing the struggle and just seeing the opportunity that exists here that maybe many children around the world would not have access to, just gave me that extra push or that extra spark as to there's so much that you can do, why not do it all?
How young were you when you realized that you had been given a different opportunity than maybe other family members or people back?
As young as elementary school, I would say. And I know for many people that would say, well, that's really young for you to even conceptualize something like that. But just looking at family back home and looking at other newcomers that were just coming in. Iran.
Okay.
So looking at that and, what children are subjected to, they're just adults or society in general, and especially as a woman, and looking at how many opportunities you have here and what, what potential is available to you to maximize yourself professionally, personally, to be able to, have access to education and to do all of these things. It was like, why wouldn't you? And so I often get the question as to, what keeps you motivated? And I respond back with, how can you not be motivated? Like, there's so much that can be done. There's so much that can be learned. There's so many peoples to meet, how many opportunities are available to you. Why not expand yourself to the greatest potential that you possibly can?
You asked that question because your mindset is there.
Yeah.
There's someone who's sitting at home very comfortable in the, I'm just going to stay put. I got my 3 meals, I got my job, I go to work, I come home. So it's a different mindset that you have, and something that was established very early. Did you feel like an outsider at all as a refugee child? We hear stories, right? Yeah. And you hope that you're embraced and you're made to feel welcome. And yet there's a different path that everyone's going to experience.
Absolutely. And I feel from even a young age, not being able to, let's say even speak English until 4 or 5 years old, I almost felt like I was playing catch up with many things, with school, with learning social norms. And that kind of allowed me to want to kind of overcompensate almost, and to get more into it, and to, perfect my language, and to learn what other kids are doing or what other parents are teaching at home. And so that kind of did push me a little bit further to want to do more. But you're right, I did have that sense of, I'm not like others, or I'm a little bit different, or just my worldview. Kids would go to school and they would talk about, their TV shows or their games or their sports that they're playing, whereas I'm talking about, oh my goodness, there's a war going on back home, or, there's kids that probably need our help. And I remember actually in the 5th grade, I went to my principal, and I believe there's either an earthquake or a flood or something that happened back home, and I was hearing my aunts and uncles talking about it, and how there's schools that have been destroyed and kids that are now living on the streets without their parents. And I went up to my principal. I was probably about 10 years old in 5th grade, and I said, we need to start a fundraiser. Like, we need to somehow help people back home. And she was almost in tears, looking at this 10-year-old who could be out in the playground playing right now during recess, but instead she's taking the time to come into the principal's office and talk about stuff like that. So the beginning of my upbringing was hard, but I really do credit it to everything that I've accomplished right now. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more as to how, my professional life kind of developed as I got older. But it's always been just looking for opportunity in everything that you have. And I know you mentioned as well, like, there's people sitting at home right now that might be comfortable, like maybe they don't have the same mindset as you. And looking at it from a positive psychology standpoint, there's the idea of the growth mindset and the fixed mindset, right? And we have to kind of assess and see where each individual is at and whether they're happy with where they're at. Some people might have that job, they might have their 3 kids, they might have their routine, and they're happy with that, and that's something that brings them fulfillment and joy. But I want to speak to the people who know they're not living up to their potential, and they know that they're doing things just out of routine or out of comfort, and they just don't know how to break out of it. This is something they've been taught, this is something that they've been brought up with, and they've never really given it a second thought as to, how can things be better, right? There's that notion that if something's not fixed, don't touch it.
If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Oh, sorry, that's right. Yeah. But why is that, right? Let's take a look at things. Let's reassess. Let's become more self-aware and look at where are areas in our life that we can maximize ourselves in.
So I love that we're going to get to this and how you were able to differentiate who is living with each different mindset. When you're looking ahead to understanding this and where your career is going to go, I'm able to tell that you were successful in school and graduated. So in choosing that line of work, where were the studies? Like, where did you decide to say, okay, if I study this, I can create this?
Yes. So I often joke and say that, coming from a Middle Eastern background, you have 3 options when you're growing up. You're either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, my parents were not one of those. They obviously, they wanted me to academically succeed, but I never felt forced to have to go into a certain field to make them happy. That being said, I always showed an interest for medicine. And that was actually one of the biggest reasons that kind of pushed me into the field of science, was I wanted to help people feel better. And I guess one of the things that triggered that, when I was in high school, my mom got diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was a very big wake-up call for myself and for her as well, to recognize the importance of our lifestyle and the importance of taking care of our health in order to prevent and not wait for adversity to hit before you start taking action on becoming more healthy. And she's not the first of her family. All of my aunts on her side have had breast cancer. My grandfather had passed away from bladder cancer. So cancer was all over. And just looking at my mom being hit and for it to hit so close to home, it was a really big wake-up call for myself to start taking care of my own health. Now, I know, Lianne, your background, you were brought up very, athletic. I was not. I was very sedentary. I, fell into the trap of, just, not being very active growing up and perhaps
at recess you were planning fundraisers.
That's right. I was planning fundraisers.
I was swinging around the monkey bar.
See, I was not. Yeah. I was very... I was very academic. I was always reading, always had books in front of me, but I was not a very active individual. So probably in my early teen years, I was a little overweight. I was not very healthy physically. And so when this happened to my mom, it was a very big shock to me and a very big wake-up call, like I said, to start paying attention to my health. So I was probably 15 years old when she was diagnosed, and I started paying very closer attention to what I'm eating, how active I'm being, started looking into, the onset of diseases, chronic illnesses, what causes them, things like type 2 diabetes, obesity, and everything led back to, nutrition, to lifestyle, to stress. So I developed this really big passion for health and well-being and looking at how to optimize yourselves physically. So given that, I automatically assumed that I want to go into medical school and become a doctor. And I've shared the story many times before, is that I was so eager getting into university, studying sciences, thinking that I'm going to become this, this doctor that's going to save lives. But very quickly getting into kind of the whole medical industry and that whole field, I started to recognize that my dream of wanting to help people maximize their potential was not going to be fulfilled going down the medical route. And not to discredit anything within the medical field whatsoever, but we're living in a time where we're very much taking a diagnose and treat approach to health conditions rather than looking at how to prevent them, looking at, how to maximize health. We're kind of taking people who are sick and making them feel okay. We're not taking them to that extra level of flourishment or of positive resiliency.
Or fighting illness in the first place.
That's right, exactly. So we're waiting for people to get a diagnosis, and then we're throwing treatments and stuff at them. We're not really looking at how to prevent. Now there's various reasons for this. There's a lot of financial backing. There's an entire system behind it. However, I very quickly realized that this is perhaps not the system that I want to be embedded in. So I was feeling a little discouraged. I opted out of going into medical school and following that as a career, but I started looking into alternative practices. So I looked into naturopathy, into chiropractic, into massage therapy, into acupuncture, into holistic nutrition, and nothing really fit my description of what I thought maximizing, health could be. They all kind of focused on a subcategory of health.
Were there aspects of each that you liked?
100%.
Like, I like this part from this section.
Absolutely. Okay. From chiropractic, I love the whole, aspect of aligning your nervous system. From naturopathy, there's, all these remedies, but there was nothing that really kind of got down to it until I discovered functional medicine probably 5-6 years back. Now, functional medicine is relatively a new term in Canada. It describes basically a practice that looks at getting to the why of disease. So getting to the root causes of illness and taking a lifestyle approach to address the causes rather than looking at how to treat the symptoms. So moreover, it looks at, treating the whole person rather than just an isolated set of symptoms. I often say, if you go to the doctor and you say, my arm hurts, they kind of take a look at that. They don't look at, well, your arm's connected to here. Could it be that you maybe sprained here, that you did this, that what's your diet like? What's your stress levels like? They don't look at that, right? They just kind of look at, all right, let's treat this arm that's in pain right now. So it's great for acute care, but looking for, solutions for chronic conditions, not so much. So I got into functional medicine after university, and we looked at various subsets of the human body, looking at how to optimize your brain health, your hormones, your detoxification pathways, your gut health. So taking a very holistic approach at how to optimize all the systems in our body so that we're functioning well as a whole. But the one aspect of functional medicine that was still missing was the mindset aspect of it, was the thought processes. And, it's great if you're eating well and you're exercising and you're, taking the right supplements and all of that. But if you're not tending to the mindset or looking at how your thoughts and your environment and your lifestyle in general is affecting your well-being, then we're still kind of missing something out of there. That's where I started looking into the field of positive psychology. Now, positive psychology kind of sounds like, just wishful thinking and thinking positive and no problems in the world
really?
exist.
Like unicorns and rainbows?
Yeah, not necessarily. Yeah, it's not kind of looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. It's more looking at what moves people north of neutral, right? So if we look at the general happiness scale of a population, who are the people that are always energetic, that are thriving, that are optimistic, that have this growth mindset? So positive psychology looked at studying those people and kind of uncovering the habits or the mindsets or the behaviors of these people, to be able to kind of quantify what happiness or fulfillment really means. So I started studying positive psychology, looking at everything from how to cultivate positive emotion, how to develop engagement with your work, how to develop an achiever's mindset, how to find meaning in your work and your life, and how to just live a life of vitality by tending to your brain's needs.
Okay, can I ask this might sound like a dumb question.
No.
When you're studying positive psychology,
right,
were there aspects of understanding the negative psychology,
yes. Absolutely.
Of why people think of it on the negative side?
100%.
Like, I mean, is this like one group looks at it, the glass is half full, and why the other sees it as half empty?
Yeah.
Is that a good comparison?
It's a good comparison,
okay.
But it gets even more complex than that. So this, again, goes back down even to our upbringing, to our biology, to genetic factors, to environmental factors, like what creates personality in someone. There's so many factors that go into it. More times than others, it is our environment that shapes us to become who we are. Genetics does play a role, but now we're learning that our genetics can be changed, and the way that they manifest in our body can be affected by even as simple as our thoughts and as simple as our environments, and so it is the whole half glass being full or empty, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. So looking at positive psychology from a perspective of not only what creates positivity in people, but what allows people to move past that negativity mindset. So in my book, I talk about this concept called the negativity bias. So this is kind of like an evolutionary phenomenon that we're all kind of wired to focus more on the negative because it's a survival mechanism, right? So if we're just always happy and everything's fine, we might miss the distraction, or we might miss the threat that's coming at us from the bushes. So we always kind of focus a little bit more on the negative. I usually talk with students and I say, if you've gotten all A's in one class and then a D in one class, which one are you more fixated on, right? The D. So we tend to focus more on the negative. But the concepts of positive psychology and neuroscience is learning the habits and behaviors that we can apply that move us past that negativity bias. It's not ignoring the negative. We all will have down days. We all will have times where things seem to be, kind of bogged up against us. We all will have stressful moments, breakups, relationship issues, problems in our career, but it's how we deal with those. So it's not the reactive personality aspects that we have, but how do we respond as our highest selves? And this is something that needs to be consciously created. We're not all just naturally these positive, vibrant beings, although some may seem. There's specific actions or thoughts or processes that need to be put in place so that we learn to not be reactive but responsive.
How difficult is that for people to work through?
Because
it sounds so good right now. I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I feel so good. This is so possible. But I'm assuming the shift and how we train our mindset is incredibly difficult, especially when we are so used to thinking the negative thoughts, or even
That's right.
just allowing them to sit there longer than we probably should.
Absolutely. And the whole aspect of, if I've been this way for near half my life, what's going to make me change? How difficult it is up to you. And it's how difficult you want to make it. And I typically tell people, like, you can read all the self-help books in the world, you can listen to all the positivity podcasts, you can even hire a coach, but for some reason your behavior won't change. Looking at it from a subconscious point of view, there's some patterns and some behaviors and some repetitive processes that have been kind of repeated over in our lives for so long that they've almost been wired in our brains. And now we're looking at, for example, people who complain often. It's very hard to break out of that pattern because the neural connections in their brain that's wired for negativity are so strong. So breaking out of that requires, step one, that awareness that you want to break out of that pattern. And it's the desire to actually want to get out of that. It's recognizing that your thought processes or your behaviors are perhaps not serving you, and that there's greater potential that exists, and wanting to bridge that gap. So wanting to get there. That's the first step. The second step is looking at...
Can I go back to... Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I go back to what you talking about? Our brains are wired. Like...
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Like when did that wiring start? And
Since the moment you were born.
we're wired a certain way.
Yes.
We've created it to be wired a certain way.
Yes.
How long does it take to undo? Like I'm thinking it like it's like a massive knot, right? It is like this. How long does it take to undo this knot?
It depends on how long it's taken for the knot to get there.
So if you have someone that's been in this mindset for 40 years, please tell me it's not going to take 40 years for us to reverse it, because then people are going to be like, whatever.
What's the point?
Right, exactly.
Yes, so neural connections develop because of repeated behaviors. So, for example, if you have a habit of, let's say, checking your phone first thing in the morning, and you want to get out of that habit, for the first few weeks, you'll notice it's very hard because it's an automatic reaction. And so habits are great because they facilitate almost, 40% of our lives are done unconsciously, right? You get into the car and you automatically just put your seatbelt on. You don't have to think about it. It's our brain's way of saving energy. By not having to consciously process everything and consciously think of everything, it creates these automatic behaviors so that it frees up time for other things. Now, unfortunately, this can be at our detriment as well, meaning that negative habits or thought processes can also become embedded that strongly so that we don't have to give it a second thought. As soon as something negative happens, we react in a negative way. So going back to your question, if it takes 40 years to create this knot of neural wiring, does it take 40 years to undo? Unfortunately, no, not necessarily, but it will require some work, because habit kind of reversal, or going back and looking at your thought patterns and looking at how you think and how you process things and how you react, will require some will. So it's depending on how willing you are to want to address these things and how effective the habits that you're going to be putting in place of it are. There's this notion in positive psychology or neuroscience that no habits can be undone. They can either be replaced or improved. So once a habit is there, we can't really go back and undo that knot. But what we can do is replace the triggers, replace the routines, and replace the rewards that are associated with that habit to now change that neural wiring to be geared towards something positive rather than going back to its negative pattern.
Okay, so let's go with your example of you get up and the first thing you do is check your phone.
For sure. So this is something I personally struggled with for quite some time, especially after launching my book and getting a little bit more active on social media. It was that automatic kind of response in the morning, having to get up and look at your notifications, look at my emails, look at who sent me messages, and it's very hard to break out of that pattern. So what I tried doing for the first couple of weeks is just ignoring my phone first thing in the morning, and it became really difficult because I'm just lying there thinking,
I want to be checking my phone.
I need to be checking. Yeah, that's right. There's people that might be waiting for me to respond to them. So it became difficult to just kind of ignore it completely. So what I did is that I went to my phone, but I replaced that habit of going through my notifications with turning on a meditation app. And so that cue of waking up and wanting to go to my phone was still there, but I replaced the routine of going through and checking notifications with something that was now more productive, which is turning on a 20-minute meditation. So I went through the meditation, and even if I checked my phone after the meditation, at least I knew that I gave myself some time to set my intentions for the day, to do some deep breathing, to have a nice calming voice talk to me for 20 minutes, and then I start my day with a little bit more of a more positively primed and more in control mindset, rather than just jumping straight out of bed and putting myself in that reactive state of going to see who needs me, who's emailed me, how many notifications do I have.
Yeah, but what's interesting for you is that you're mentioning work-related things. You're not going on Facebook or Instagram to see or were you going on to see what everyone else's lives were like?
It was, no, not necessarily. I wasn't going on there to see.
Because most people will get on their phone immediately and then will go to more of, they're not checking their emails immediately. They're going on to Instagram and Facebook.
That's right, yeah.
And noticing what everyone else is doing.
Absolutely. And it's funny you bring this up because there's an article I actually wrote last night on how peak performers use social media. And this was about a 3-month study I did on a couple of people that I decided to kind of pick on for 3 months and monitor their social media behavior. And kind of take these now few people, divide them up into a group and give them specific instruction and see how they would act with that. So the result of my little experiment was that social media is extremely addicting, and it's almost like a slot machine, right? Because it's variable rewards. You never know what you might get, and likes, comments, shares, even looking at other people's posts are immediate dopamine boosts in our brain, and we like that. We like that immediate feel-good feeling. Dopamine is also responsible for many other addictive behaviors such as, sex, drugs, alcohol, gambling. So looking at how we use these social media platforms or, getting up and going to your phone first thing in the morning, it very much is an addiction. And sometimes it's an unconscious behavior, right? We just get up and we scroll through the newsfeed, even if we're not really taking anything in. It's just developed into this behavior that we now succumb to. So going back to that,
I want this article. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'll send it to you after.
Okay, but can you share it with the listeners? So what were the group of people? So you had how many?
There was about 10.
Okay, you had 10 people.
Very
okay,
small.
Well,
it's not
still it's a lot of different people's behavior.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right. So these are people. Both people that create content on social media, so let's say influencers who are well known and who have a specific amount of following, and also people who perhaps don't really create as much content but are there to consume. So I didn't give them any instruction at first. All I said is to monitor how many times you open the app, how many times you go onto your phone, and how many times you unconsciously start scrolling and maybe 5 minutes later realize like, oh, crap, I maybe opened an email and then somehow got sucked into Facebook. So I started looking at their behaviors and started recording how many times this happened, and what times of the day do they feel more compelled to go onto social media? Under what circumstances did they feel that they were kind of pulled more towards social media? And so, just in a nutshell, the results were that in the afternoon was much higher than in the morning or the evening. It almost felt like that afternoon slump where you've kind of accomplished some things, and during the few hours of the day, and then you almost get sucked into it after lunchtime or when work maybe gets boring, or it was when people had to do cognitively taxing tasks. So things that were maybe a little bit difficult that they were trying to avoid, they would just kind of move on to social media, almost like an immediate dopamine. Because when we're sitting there, let's say you're writing an article, for example, it will require some brain work, right? It will require you to have some output. It requires like those creative juices to get going. But when they're not going, we kind of feel incompetent. We kind of feel frustrated with ourselves. So what we do is that we move on to social media for that immediate dopamine rush, for that feel-good feeling of like, okay, like things are okay. And so this distraction of constantly going back and forth is counterintuitive, but I found that the majority of the time when people were pulled more towards social media or found themselves scrolling mindlessly was when they were supposed to be focused on something else. So I guess the result of all this is that I gave them specific instruction. To one group, I said to continue doing what you're doing, and to the other group, I told them to block off maybe 1 or 2 hours a day to be on social media and don't surpass it. So if, let's say, you're on social media from 11 to 12, and your purpose is to answer your messages, to maybe, like and share some stuff, to engage with your post, but once your hour is up, that's it. Social media is done for the day. And then I got them to monitor their productivity, their energy levels, even their mood. And so, like I said, this wasn't something that was scientifically done. I just kind of quickly based it off of some research I've done in the past, and I wanted to do something fun and see if I could influence people to become more focused or productive by limiting.
I'm thinking even awareness.
Oh, yes.
I'm thinking even having to not jot down when and how often.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I know now that we have our phones and it's telling us.
Yeah, that's right.
how much time you spent on there. And sometimes I think you're shocked.
Yes.
By the amount of time that you've spent on these
Exactly.
apps.
That's it. And I think the average that I recorded was about 86 to 111 times that the person opened up their app, and whether it was for Instagram, Facebook, email, Pinterest, YouTube. So for whichever of these platforms, 86 to 111 times is how much I recorded for the average between how many times we open per day. So just think about how many times a day you're interrupted just by, whatever you're doing, whether you're just, in the grocery store or maybe you're doing work, but these pings that come up on your screen all of a sudden is so tempting to go check out. Another piece of instruction that I gave the group that I had instructed maybe only to time block was to, when you're logging, or so when you get off the app, actually physically log out of it. And so this is actually a concept I got from Harvard psychologist Sean Aker. And if you're not familiar with him, I would recommend going to check out his TED Talk on happiness. It's probably one of the most viewed TED Talks out there. But he talks about how to kind of prevent ourselves from getting into negative behaviors by adding a factor of resistance. So his example was that he realized when he would come back from work, he would just kind of plop in front of the TV and turn the TV on and then sit there mindlessly watching TV for 4 hours when he knows well enough that he's got maybe things to, students' papers to be marking or doing literally anything else. And so he said that to prevent himself from doing that, he took the batteries out of his remote control and put them in a separate room. So when he would come home and sit in front of the TV, the thing didn't work, and he knew he had to get up and go get the batteries, which would probably take about 20 seconds. But the work that was associated with that just kind of said, you know what, screw it, it's not worth it. So he found it interesting that he was able to almost cut his TV watching in half just by doing that. So he's like, where else can I, add this into my life? So he looked at how do I remove barriers from actions that I actually want to take. So one of his goals was to practice playing the guitar, but his guitar was, stowed away in a closet upstairs somewhere. And so every time he came home, he's like, oh, well, I got to go upstairs, got to go take it out of the case. It's heavy, carry it all the way downstairs. So what he did is that he actually brought the guitar downstairs and kept it in his living room on a stand. So he didn't have an excuse. It was right there. And so he curated the 20-second rule, is as he calls it, because sometimes it just takes maybe 5 to 20 seconds to either initiate or stop a behavior. But our brains kind of see it as, it's that extra work. It's just going upstairs to get this, or it's maybe replacing the batteries in the remote control, so I might as well just not do it. So this was something that I implemented with the Facebook group, the social media group, and I told them log out of all the apps completely, because now every time you're tempted to open up that app,
you have to log in.
You got to log in, you got to put your email, you got to put your password. Sometimes it asks you for like 2-factor authentication. Do you want to do that? No, not really. And they actually found that it significantly helped them, because they would say that they would even open up the app unconsciously, like not even wanting to go on Facebook, and they're like, oh, all of a sudden the Facebook app is open, but because they had to enter their email and their password, they no longer.
Oh my God, I'm logging out of all my stuff as soon as this is over.
And I mean, this is just one example. Like, we can look at how are we able to add these barriers into other areas of our life to kind of negate our way of getting into poor behaviors. So is it this is probably a bad example, but putting bad food in a safe in the basement, or is it it's how do we add these barriers to our life so that we don't feel inclined to take that extra step to get there. So
are you able to give us like another example or so of that
Sure.
shift of that positivity mindset and noticing,
Yes.
even if you say within that 20 seconds when you're starting to have negative thought process of what are triggers, what can we do to help ourselves out of them? This podcast is brought to you by Extension Marketing. They are a new breed of marketing agency that acts as your virtual marketing department, designing and implementing cost-effective marketing strategies that will grow your business. I can speak to this personally, as I've been using the Extension Marketing team to help me launch and grow my business. Founder Pat Whalen has been a lifesaver for me, a genuine coach guiding me along the way into uncharted territory. Tell them you're a friend of the show and receive a free 1-hour consultation. Check them out at extensionmarketing.com.
Definitely. So there's one technique I use with my clients, and it's a technique I adopted from cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's called the ABC model of response or responding well. So A stands for adversity, B stands for belief, and C stands for consequence. So typically when we're faced with an adversity, let's say, for example, you get fired from your job. Your immediate reaction is disappointment, is sadness, is anger maybe. We go right into the consequence, but we're skipping a step here, which is that belief aspect of it. And there's so much research coming out now looking at the impact of our belief on even, reversing certain illnesses. The documentary Heal, for example, is a good example of that. So looking at how our beliefs can alter the consequence, or let's say the negativity mindset that we have. So let's say you do get fired from your job, and if your belief is, maybe I'm incompetent, I was, this was unfair, I'm never going to find a job like this, like whatever it is, the consequence might be feelings of sadness, frustration, anger. But if your belief was, maybe this is, a good opportunity for me. Maybe I maximized my capacity in that field that I was in, and maybe now I'm meant for more. Now your consequence might still be a little fearful. It might still be, feeling maybe a little frustrated, a little angry, but you're optimistic. So looking at how to reprogram our brains, this is an exercise I give to my clients, is to write down 5 negative things that perhaps have happened to you in the last couple of months. And write down the consequences of how those made you feel. Now go back to those and look at what your beliefs were about that adversity. Was it a boyfriend that left you? Was it a friend that did you wrong? Was it someone, stole your Netflix subscription? Whatever it was. Look at how your beliefs are now kind of impacting that consequence. And how can you change that belief? So, for example, if someone cut you off while you were driving, you can, start swearing and giving them fingers and getting angry. Or you can shift that belief or that inner self-dialogue and say, you know what, maybe that person was on their way on to a podcast and they were running late, for example. Maybe that person had, their kid sick at home and they were just rushing home for them. So looking at how do we shift things, and it's not making excuses for people, but it's not going to do you any good shifting to that immediate reactive, angry, frustrated, sad state. So how do we kind of negate that by justifying it to ourselves and by shifting the belief that we have about that negative thing that happened?
I love it.
Yeah.
I love this. I want to be able to hit on the peak aspect of peak performance, if that's okay, because I know within peak, there's a number of things we want to hit on.
Yes. Yep.
So this is part of the book. This is part of the website. This is part of the pillars, like everything that you talk about. So peak performance, where's the peak?
Where's the peak? So, I've noticed myself, and I kind of being in that entrepreneurial field or being in the high performance and all of that, being in that since, from a very young age, I've always noticed that when we're talking about high performance, it's very much geared towards sales, business mastery, mindset. I found very little that took a very all-encompassing approach to high performance. So when we want to define a high-performing or a successful individual, how do we define them? And I actually tested this out. There's a little, again, another mini research study that I talk about in the beginning of my book, where I asked people, like, what does success mean to you? And some people said time freedom, some people said financial freedom, other people said, doing what you love. So success is very subjective. But what I tried to quantify is that there's 3 very crucial pillars to high performance that I believe every individual should have if they want to take themselves from overachiever to peak performer. The first one is your physiology. This is the first P of peak performance. And so that kind of touches back on the functional medicine aspect. And that is, how do we fuel ourselves? How do we move? How do we sleep? How do we take care of our body? Because, we can argue that you can be, financially abundant and your career can be taking off and you could be doing various things that make you look successful from the outside. But if you're sleeping 4 hours a night, if you're, not eating properly, if you're not exercising properly, if you're not meditating, if you're not taking care of the core essence of your being, is that success going to be maintainable, right? Are you going to be able to keep up with everything? So I think now, especially with the shift towards more wellness and looking at even like, the corporate entrepreneur or whatever, it's not necessarily looking at their financial gain or looking at how much they've achieved, but how well they're able to maintain a quality of life and how well they're able to care for themselves in the pursuit of success. So that's the first pillar. The first pillar is physiology. The second one is psychology, and that's exactly kind of what we've been talking about. How do we kind of how do we set ourselves up for success by looking at or becoming more aware of how our mind works? So exactly like the ABC model, like, are we jumping from adversity to consequence? Do we even think about the belief? Are we even aware of that? How do we respond in negative situations? Or are we aware of the habits or the beliefs or the processes that we have as a person? So it's bringing that awareness back to our own mindset and looking at how do we optimize our minds in a way that we're acting as our highest selves, that we have habits that are serving us, that we have beliefs that are serving us, and that we're kind of flourishing mentally. And then the third aspect that is almost like a byproduct of the physiology and the psychology is productivity. So productivity is not necessarily how much you can accomplish, but how you're giving back to the world. How are you showing up in the world? Is the work that you're doing contributing to society? Are your daily actions congruent with who you are as a person? Are you acting in alignment with your beliefs and with your core values? So productivity, I think, has been given a bad rap. It's not so much, how much you can accomplish or how much money you've made, but it's more how can you live in more, I guess, congruence with how you want to show up in the world. So
But can you maybe have a job that you don't feel is changing the world? That you're inputting numbers and you're having to type up things and you're just having to analyze graphs, right?
Yeah.
So you're not feeling like what you're spending your days doing is making a difference in the world. So how are you able to find that productivity?
right.
Are you able to find it elsewhere so that you don't have to put all of your eggs in one basket?
Absolutely. So that's kind of twofold. Either yes, you can kind of cultivate purpose and passion outside of your line of work. But what I typically like to do with people, and because your work is something that you're going to be immersed in for a very long time, is to find meaning in what you're doing. There's a beautiful story I heard about a janitor in a hospital. And so you're looking at, the doctors and the surgeons and then the janitor, and you would obviously think that the doctors and surgeons probably have a much more meaningful or, they find a higher purpose in what they're doing. Whereas when they interviewed the janitor actually was scoring higher on purpose and happiness than some of the doctors were. So they started looking at, well, why is that? And he says, well, I really think that when I clean and when I make sure that, germs are not getting around, and when I'm making sure the hallways are nice and tidy, that I'm helping the doctors do their job better. So he saw his job as, being a janitor, as having a higher purpose because he's helping the doctors, and those are the people that are helping, save lives. And I talk about in my book as well, the analogy of the 3 bricklayers. So there's 3 bricklayers, and one guy says I'm laying bricks. The other one says I'm building a church, and the third one says I'm building a house of God. So looking at that is we can cultivate meaning and purpose in anything that we do, regardless of if we feel we're passionate towards our work, whether we feel if it's just data entry, let's say, what is it doing to facilitate maybe. Is it adding ease into someone else's life? Is it, as little of a, maybe as significant as you might not think it is, what is it doing to maybe help the rest of your team or your company? Or is it adding, value to the world in some way? Now, not everyone wants to, save whales and rainforests and all of that, but we have to look for the hidden meaning in perhaps the subtle actions that we take on a daily basis. For example, you being here doing this, you're maybe not saving the world actively, but perhaps the people that you're bringing on here are sharing value with others, and someone else listening to this might all of a sudden want to change their life.
Right. That's where I feel is my piece, right? Is that, and I've often said, like, Tuesdays, because we always call it Podcast Tuesday.
Yeah.
Tuesdays for me are the day where I most feel, my purpose.
Right.
Tuesdays I feel like me because I'm telling and I'm facilitating stories and information that I find is going to help someone listening.
Right.
And so I feel, I love these days.
Yeah.
And it's what I'm most accustomed to doing. It's what I did for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Whereas the other 6 days of the week I feel like I'm lost because I'm having to do all of these other tasks that I'm just not good at. But come Tuesday, I'm like, I'm in my space, right? So we all find it in different ways. Okay, so we've done the P's. I'm like, now I'm like, okay, I want to get through your P because I'm not even looking at Veronica for her to even tell me. We're still good. We're good for time. Okay, so let's go. We have our P's. Let's go to our E's.
All right.
Yeah.
So we got that. So I did create
because I'd love to stay on. I'm dying to stay on all of this, but people will get the basis of it all, and then people will just have to hire you or get your book. Okay.
Sounds good. So the E kind of stands for energized and engaged, and this goes back to the P, where I talk about you have to be proactive with your physiology, your psychology, and your productivity. But being energized and engaged is taking that responsibility of putting that into action. So how do I energize myself? How do I get myself to do the things that I want to do? And again, energizing kind of goes back to looking at our energy physiologically and psychologically. So what am I doing to feed myself the right information or even the right fuel to be able to show up as my best? So am I, kind of listening to rap on my way to work, or am I perhaps putting on a podcast? Am I feeding my brain the right information? Am I surrounding myself with the right people? And it goes back to, again, the health aspect of it. Am I energizing myself, right? Am I fueling myself? Am I taking care of my mindset? Am I exercising? Am I meditating? So it's that energy aspect of it. Engage is more, how do I engage with things that are being thrown at me? Am I engaging my highest values? Am I, and these are all questions that I feel everyone as an individual should be asking on a regular basis.
Well, they can be asking them. But they can be saying no. No,
And
no, I haven't done that. No,
Yeah.
I haven't done that. Right. So,
And that's totally fine. It's bringing it into your awareness, because 90% of people are living on autopilot, doing things because that's just the way they've always been doing it, or the way that they've been taught, or the way society has kind of shown them the way. And they don't question why are we doing things the way we are. So being engaged is again taking that step back and bringing our awareness back to, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Am I focused with my work? Why is it that I'm constantly distracted? Am I working on high output tasks? Can things be delegated? So looking at how do we focus our energy in a way that brings about our highest selves, and that actually creates impact, and so that we're not just kind of running around like like a chicken with their head cut off from one task or from one thing to the next without actually getting anywhere. I talk about how sometimes there's a difference between moving around and moving forward. So when we're spread kind of a little bit too thin, we're moving around, going in circles, trying to tend to this and that and keep everything in alignment, where if we focus our energy towards one source, or perhaps towards one output, we find ourselves way more engaged and way more susceptible to success.
Okay, so Parmees, I'm sorry. When you're talking about moving around and instead of moving forward, moving around for many people is get up, get the kids to school, get them to activities, make sure they got their lunches, get to work, do the activities, pick up things, get the carpools, get to dinner. And then, so how does one see themselves moving around, which we are doing, as you said, 90% of it subconsciously, to moving forward? Is it taking one single thing at a time?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because right now I'm going, I'm moving around.
So if you look at whatever goal that you have, and I mean, the things that you described are basic, the basics of life that I feel, regardless of if you're living consciously or unconsciously, you will have to do. There's some things where it comes to work, when it comes to kids, when it comes to the groceries and the carpool and all that need to be done. Where I'm talking a little bit more about is your professional or personal goals, and how you're setting yourself up for success, and how you're setting yourself up to be motivated. Are you taking on way too many tasks that perhaps, you could benefit from not taking on? Is it better for you to focus on just one avenue and move that forward and reach success before you move on to taking on the next, right? Let's say, especially as moms, they want to take on, making sure your kids are well fed and they're at their classes and they're at this and they're at that. And then the mom themselves they want to make sure that they're excelling at work. They want to make sure that they're, the little side project they've taken on, and they overcommit themselves. So I think it's time to learn to start saying no and start prioritizing ourselves, not in a selfish way, but almost in a selfless way, to see that if I want to be performing at my best, I need to be at my best. And by trying to please everyone and perhaps, spreading ourselves too thin with this task or this commitment or this promise, we're not really getting anywhere. So looking at what is the goal that I have, I typically like to do this at the beginning of the year and perhaps every quarter, is what is the goal I have for this quarter? What are maybe the 3 to 5 steps required to get there? And what are things that I need to cut out of my life that will prevent me from getting to that goal? It could be maybe running a marathon. It could be writing a book. It could be whatever personal or professional goal that you have. The whole aspect of remaining engaged is not to, maybe cut out your kids or cut out groceries or delegate your husband to someone else. You can't really do that. But how do you align yourself with taking intentional action and cutting out the unnecessary? That's where engagement comes in. Okay.
Yes.
So that's the E. The A was being action driven. So not only just, learning all these things, but actually putting them into action. And that's where I find many people, especially kind of in the entrepreneurial high achiever world, get stuck, because they kind of go on this, spree of reading books and listening and going to these conferences and going to this and that. And they take in all this information and they have the world of knowledge at their fingertips. But it's putting it into action that stops them.
They're paralyzed.
Exactly.
It's almost like, okay, I've got too much now. I've got too many ideas. I should have been doing all of these things that I should have been doing.
Yeah.
And then you sit there and go, I can't even conceptualize trying to do it.
That's right. So going a little bit, taking a step back on that is looking at...
I'll include myself.
Yeah. And you know what? You're not alone.
I'll fairly say I can include myself in that. I have way too many things that there's times where I'm just like, I can't.
It's analysis paralysis. There's so many things that you've consumed and that you've learned and that you want to do that you almost don't know where to start. You don't know where to start. That's right. So again, number one thing is going back to our subconscious patterning and looking at perhaps what are things that are preventing us, what are belief systems, what are habits that are preventing us from even taking that first step. Going back to the phone, is it, that you want to read 3 books a month, and instead of getting up and maybe perhaps opening up your book, you're opening up Facebook. So looking at what patterns and behaviors am I showing right now that are perhaps getting in the way of me wanting to move forward with my goals. Even further than that, I recommend to everyone to go on a low information diet. And especially now with Google and Facebook and all these websites and articles and newsletter opt-ins, and we're bombarded with information. And so it's that paradox of choice of when we have so many things to do, we almost don't want to do any of it. So going on a low information diet is not necessarily, becoming ignorant and not wanting to, learn anything new, but it's being selective with the type of information that you want to allow in and looking at what is something that I can take immediate action on, right? If I'm learning about high performance habits, like it's great to learn how to be a leader and how to this, but what are things that I can immediately implement in my life right now? I'll disregard the rest. I do this with books, for example. I read a lot, probably on average about 4 to 6 books a month, but I always make sure that the books I'm reading are relevant to the things that I'm doing in that time. Someone gifted me a book called The CEO Next Door, and I started reading the first chapter, and it was a lot about how to lead an organization, how to delegate tasks, how to manage. And at the time, I'm like, I don't really have a team to be delegating things to. As great as this book is, I'm going to leave it for a time that this information will become relevant. Instead, for example, I'm launching an online course. I'm going to pick up a book on digital marketing to learn a little bit more about that. So going on a low information diet and a selective information diet, looking at what are things that I can consume that will immediately benefit me, and immediately after consuming information, maybe perhaps even making a mental note, or I really like writing it out by hand. What are things that I took away from this that I can immediately put into action, right? If I learned that the ABC model, for example, how can I start applying that to negative situations going forward? And then actually start scheduling it, because, Brennan Bouchard always says, if something's not scheduled, it's not going to get done. So looking at how to prioritize this in our lives. So that was. Do
you do a lot of scheduling?
I do.
That the day is scheduled?
I do. However, I don't like also over-scheduling myself in the sense that everything is almost like kind of roboticized, where...
Like, I find it fascinating. Sometimes I'll get a Google invite, or I'll get one of those calendars sent, and you have to pick between, a couple of different spots to choose from. And
it's hard to commit.
Well, no, I can commit because my days aren't... I'm looking at the person who sent me this calendar and going, oh my God, this is what their day is like. They have scheduled meetings every 15, 20 minutes, and you're picking them, and you know that they're literally going from one of these meetings to the next. Yeah. And I'm just like...
can't do that.
And I think what their mindset must be like, going, I have to get through this day with this many meetings.
Yeah. So it depends on your personality type. Some people really like that, and they thrive on that. And that's the only way almost that
things get done.
Exactly, that things get done. What I mean by if it's not scheduled, it won't get done. For example, I had the goal of writing a book within the first year of graduating from school. I completed it within 8 months of doing so, and that was because I reverse engineered my goals. So I had a goal to publish the book in November of 2018, and at the time it was October of 2017. So I looked at the goal, I looked at the amount of work that needed to be done, and then I reverse engineered what was required to be done. So how many, what are the concepts I want to talk about? How many chapters would this turn out to be? How many research articles do I want to implement in this? And then I started looking at how to bulk kind of my months to month 1 I'm working on introduction and chapter 1, or the preface and chapter 2, and then month 2 I'm working on this and that. So it's not necessarily scheduling, today, okay, Lianne, you're going to wake up, and after, 6 a.m., you're going to check this, and then you're going to email this person, then you have a meeting from this time. But it's more setting intention rather than setting kind of concrete, tasks in your schedule. Something else I really like doing, and I do with a lot of my productivity clients, is time blocking. So, for example, there's a lot of research coming out right now looking at the different Chrono Types. So Chrono Types is almost like the science behind whether you're a night owl, or if you're a lark, or if you're, what times of the day do you function at your best. And there's a book I recommend. It's called The Power of When. And this book completely, I think I read it about 2.5 years ago, completely changed the way I do work. And the way I was going about it before was, I was thinking that all these high performers are, waking up at 5 a.m. and getting the majority of their work done before everybody else wakes up. And I was trying to do that, but I felt myself extremely fatigued, not motivated. I was not creative at that hour. And I just thought, what's wrong with me? I'm not a high performer, because every high performer we know wakes up at 5 a.m. And then I read this book and I learned about the different types of chronotypes and how, based, genetically, certain people are more prone to be more productive at different times of the day. And so he has a little quiz in his book, and I did it, and it turns out that I'm most productive between, let's say, 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And so now I know that if that's when I'm most productive and creative and focused, that I'm going to schedule my most, I guess, mentally taxing or hard, or if I need to be socially interactive or anything like that between those hours, because I know that's when I'm at my peak. Whereas I know maybe perhaps 4 or 5 in the afternoon, or maybe even 8 p.m. is not a good time for me to be kind of on my A game.
Are there certain people that they work well, at 8,
For sure. There are, when I was when I was going through the edits of my book, my editor was sending things back at like 3 a.m. And so she said that she was working from 11 till like 3 a.m. And I'm like, that's crazy, but that's how she functioned. And then she would sleep in till like 11 a.m. the next day. But that's when she was the most focused, and that's when she found herself being the most productive. So again, it's not necessarily scheduling everything back to back to back, but becoming more aware of what times of the day are we at our best, and how can we schedule the tasks that will require a little bit more of our effort and energy during those times.
Am I allowed at this point, because a lot of people know I'm very, it's a personal thing for me that people schedule in the self-care of of going to the gym, of doing physical activity.
That's right.
So do you schedule this, and would you consider this part of the blocking time?
Yes.
Or the scheduling aspect of your life, that
yes.
you have to schedule it in like an appointment?
So that's something that I've created. I've kind of created a power up and a power down hour. And I'm human, so I don't always stick to it. There will be instances where I kind of fall off track, but I try my best to stick to it as much as possible. So my power up hour, the first hour of the day, I try my best to not look at my phone. And like I said, sometimes if I do, I've kind of muted notifications overnight. So that way, if I look at the screen of my phone, I don't technically see any Facebook comments or emails or anything like that. So I don't see that. It's not as tempting to open it up and see what someone has to say. I will open up my meditation app. I'll meditate for 20 minutes. I'll have my workout first thing in the morning, because that's when I feel like I'm at my best to be physically active. I'll prepare myself a nice breakfast or a nice coffee if I'm fasting that day, and that's my kind of power up hour before I get myself into whatever else I want to do, and that allows me the time to do kind of my quote unquote self-care before the day starts and before I know perhaps other people's obligations or things will fall into my lap.
Okay.
Yeah,
I do love you, but you're young.
Yes,
you don't have kids.
Yep.
And you're an entrepreneur, so you're
yes.
right.
Yep.
So there's people that are up early.
Yeah.
Got to get the kids off to daycare or to school, then are at work. So how do you, because they're going to come to you and be like, okay, look at my schedule.
100%.
Where on earth is this occurring? Where is this happening?
So that can be custom curated based on what your needs are. This whole power up and power down thing could take 5 minutes. The entire intention of it is for you to take a set period of time, whether it's 5 minutes, an hour, maybe even 3 hours, to be intentional with what you want to do in that moment and not have the distractions of the outside world try to get in. So I actually have a couple of clients that are moms of newborns even. So like I don't really, make my schedule. My newborn makes my schedule for me. And so I say, okay, but you do know what time, you're putting them to bed. You do know what time they're taking their naps, what time they're feeding. So perhaps custom curate your schedule around when are even 10 minutes that I can take time to maybe journal or to maybe do some yoga or, just it doesn't need to be, first thing in the morning or last thing you do before you go to bed, as, a lot of these high performance people say, like, the last thing you do before you go to bed is extremely important to set you up for success for the next day, which I agree, but the world's not going to end if that's not the time that you do it in. If you know that your child is off to daycare, perhaps you have maybe a couple of hours in the afternoon to yourself. Again, you can mindlessly scroll through Instagram or do things that are maybe not productive. Or you can schedule some me time or some things to work on for yourself. Perhaps it's not self-care per se, like manicures and facial masks and yoga, but it's maybe taking time to work on a goal that you perhaps would want to work on. Or maybe it's speaking to someone. Maybe it's going to coffee with a friend. So it's custom making it to what you think will energize you and that will prepare you mentally and physically to show up as your best in other areas of your life as well.
We've just did on the A, which was the action, taking action. So what are we getting to K?
So K is for keen and knowledgeable. And this goes back to, it might sound counterintuitive because I just told everyone to go on a low information diet, but I want people to question things, and I want people to want to be knowledgeable in various aspects of their lives. Again, like I said, some people kind of go into a specific area of study and they just very niche down and just focus on that. Some people go into an area of work and they just focus on that. If you ask them anything outside of their line of work, they're not sure. I've always had a very deep appreciation for people who have had this sense of curiosity and that want to learn more. And I feel like this should even be like the first step to peak performance, is being keen and knowledgeable, to wanting to go that extra mile, wanting to learn more, wanting to become more aware, because all of that brings intention back to ourselves.
Okay, but if someone is even Googling the word peak performance or looking you up or wanting more information, that's already been triggered. That's already, there's already a curiosity there. Absolutely. Or an acknowledgement that something might not be working, and they have to figure out why.
That's right. Yeah. So looking at people who perhaps are stuck in this state of perpetual routine, or who are in the state that they know they want to break out of, but they need an extra, they need a little bit of push out there. It's more for those people that I say to reach out to something that puts you outside of your comfort zone. What's one tiny step that you can take that will take you outside of your typical routine, that will maybe even provide a different perspective on how you've been thinking or how you've been brought up. And that itself might even be the triggering force that creates the momentum for you to want to pursue, something else. For me, for example, being, let's say I was in high school, just getting into university, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, I started becoming a little bit more curious about what else is out there that's outside of the medical field that can help improve health. That was just a simple question. And I think becoming keen and knowledgeable just begins with questions. Just start questioning, why is it that I've always done this way? Is there a better way to do so? Just that mere act of asking that question will kind of trigger that curiosity to want to go and search for answers. I just finished reading for the second time, actually, Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek. And it was just, a pure example of this, of, why is it that we've been told that we need to work 9 to 5 every day, or that business hours are Monday to Friday, or that to be successful, you need to be working, like crazy hours to make money. And so his whole premise of the book was start asking the questions that other people aren't asking. Like, why can't I work only 4 hours a week and still end up making the exact same as I was making, before? So it's just those questions, and it's becoming, like I said, curious and open to receiving information that perhaps might conflict with the way that you've been living.
So the way that we have been living, as you have said, is based on a lot of habit.
And subconscious programming. Yeah.
What do you think is the hardest thing of all the things that you have mentioned and talked about? What is the hardest thing that people face?
Facing aspects of themselves that they perhaps don't want to change, and they know that it's not conducive to, high performance, or it's not conducive to them in whatever that they're doing, but looking at it and saying, well, that's just the way I am. And I know it's not perfect, but that's just the way I am. That goes back to the fixed mindset. And it's very hard to kind of get people outside of that fixed mindset. And again, just to define fixed mindset is when you think that you were just born the way you were, and you have a fixed kind of set of capabilities or abilities, and that you're not able to perhaps go outside of the scope of who you are.
So we were talking about that earlier. It was the fixed and the growth?
The growth mindset. So the growth mindset is, for example, let's say sales, for example, okay? So a salesperson might not be meeting their quota or might not be hitting their targets. A person with a fixed mindset will say, well, I'm just not good at sales. The person with the growth mindset will say, what can I do to improve my ability to sell? What can I learn? Who can I hire that might be able to help me? I might not be good at sales yet. That's the key, yet. But I know with time and with effort, I can get there. So that itself, and most people might say like, oh yeah, like I think like that. But we might have growth and fixed mindsets about different areas of our life, right? Professionally, let's say in our career, we might have a growth mindset. But then when it comes to relationships, we might think like, oh, I just attract dirtbags. That's who I am, right? So it's becoming more aware of what areas of our life do we have a fixed mindset and where areas do we have a growth mindset. So the hardest thing is breaking out of that fixed mindset, because most people have become so comfortable with just accepting and justifying why certain things are not going their way. They just say, well, that's just who I am, or I'm just not cut out for it. Or, like Parmees has a natural gift for, let's say, speaking, which I don't, by the way. The first speech I gave, I actually ran off stage crying. So, so it's again, adopting that growth mindset towards wanting to break out of what our regular or our typical patterns of behavior are. So that's probably, going back to your question, it's the hardest thing. It's getting people to realize, and that's not something I can do, that you can do. That person needs to almost come to that conclusion themselves, that I might not be good at this yet, but with time and effort, I can get better.
What would you say, and I'm going to put you on the spot here right now. Okay, because this to kind of wrap it. What would you say would be the 5, can you come up with 5 things right now? Someone's listening to this.
Okay.
5 things that you consider are not the easier parts, but things that they could probably do right now to be able to start to be able to kind of look at those the chemical change, the neuroscience, what's happening in our brains.
Right.
What are small things that might just trigger, the littlest triggers that will help us on this journey?
Okay. One thing, again, coming back to the whole self-awareness thing, is bringing attention back to not just one area of our life, but looking at all aspects of our lives, from our spirituality to our professional life, to our relationship with ourselves, to our relationship with others, to our health and wellness, to everything that kind of encompasses who we are as a being. Even if it means writing it down on a piece of paper and listing out the things that are going well and the things that aren't going so well. Finances even, right? And looking at perhaps what are the reasons that we're not maybe thriving in those areas. So this will kind of trigger that look at ourselves, and sometimes we don't like the answers. If it comes to our professional growth, if it comes to finances, if it comes to relationships, most of the time, our external world is a reflection of what's going on internally. So we need to kind of face, what are things that I'm blocking myself from accomplishing or from reaching. It's that scarcity and abundance mindset that comes into place as well. That kind of goes back again to the growth and the fixed. So becoming more aware of where are we going wrong. And sometimes we don't know the answers. We say, well, let's say I don't have as much money as I want to have. Well, I don't know, what am I doing wrong? But it's becoming more aware of that, and then looking going forward, what are scenarios that come up, or what are situations that come up that you might end up blocking yourself from that opportunity? Is it your fear of growth? Is it your fear of succeeding in something? Is it your discomfort of doing something that that you perhaps aren't very good at, but you have to put yourself in that spot? So it's becoming more aware of what are areas of your life that you could be doing better in. The next step, I guess I would say, the second piece of advice is to destroy the idea that motivation is needed to do anything. I actually myth bust this in my book, that motivation, the whole bubble of motivational speaking and motivational this and that is a complete joke. Psychologically, motivation does not exist. And if you look at what creates people to take action, it's not motivation, it's momentum. And what I mean by momentum is taking one tiny action towards that action, or towards the goal, will kind of create this cascade of, okay, I accomplished this and it wasn't so bad, so let me take one more step. And I tell people that if you wait for this magical kind of motivational spark to occur, you're never going to get to anywhere. It's creating the discipline and the habits in place that small momentum that you build on. If it's cleaning your room, let's say, taking maybe one paper clip off the ground and putting it on your desk will kind of create that cascade of, okay, that wasn't so bad, let me just continue. I often say, when I did a little bit of book coaching last year after I published my own book, I had a flood of people saying, like, how did you do it so quick? And so when I was coaching them, they said, Parmees, there are certain days that I sit down and I have this concept in my head, I just have no idea how to put it on paper. So I just end up staring at a blank sheet for hours and nothing comes out. And I say, okay, so you have the concept? And they say yes. And I'm like, okay, can you associate a couple of words to that concept? Let's say you want to talk about growth. Maybe the word is brain, maybe the word is goals, maybe something like that. So start writing those words down, even if they don't connect to each other whatsoever. And then create sentences with that word. Like if your word is goal, like what sentence can you create with that? And you'd be surprised at how crazy, like how quickly just writing out simple words can all of a sudden turn to sentences that turn to paragraphs and now all of a sudden conclude in a chapter.
It's momentum.
It's momentum. it's not motivation. If I sit there just feeling like, you know what, I really don't feel like working, or I really don't feel like putting effort into writing today, it's not going to happen. But if I say, like, I'm just going to write 3 words, that's it. I'm just going to write 3 words and see where that takes me. It's that momentum of that thought. Oh, all of a sudden this word popped in my head that thinks, you know, that makes me think of another idea, that makes me think of something else, and it creates that. So that would be my second piece of advice.
Okay, you've got like 30 seconds to do number 3, 4, and 5.
Okay, so let's keep it to 3.
Because now I have looked over at Veronica and I'm like, we are so over. Yeah,
I apologize.
Yeah. No. I think people who have stuck in this long are saying, okay, let's keep going.
Let's keep going. Yeah.
So, but 3, 4, 5.
Yeah. Last piece of advice is to perhaps take a deeper look at your environment. And this includes people that you're surrounded with. This includes things that you listen to. This includes places that you frequently go to. And we're often a product of our environment. Like, you know, you've heard probably we're the sum of the 5 people we spend, you know, the most amount of time with. And we often discredit how long or how profound of an impact the people around us, the environments around us, the types of information we consume actually have an impact on even our genetic expression. So becoming more aware of if the people around me are actually serving me, or are they the ones keeping me back, right? If I'm in this mindset of I want to be better, but everyone else is kind of just like, no, we're fine, we're comfortable. Why do you want to fix something that isn't broken? That's what's keeping me from taking that action. So again, becoming a little bit more mindful of where am I often going? Who am I often talking to? What types of information am I constantly taking in? Becoming more aware of that and looking at ways of perhaps breaking out of that might be a good way for you to develop that extra boost to want to perform at higher levels.
I'm like a sponge right now. Like, I feel like such a sponge. Well, I know right off the bat right now, like I know I'm going to turn off I have to log in and log out.
Awesome.
I think that is going, I think that will be a massive part of just shifting certain behavior. And I just like, you know, you got those 20 seconds to be able to kind of the thoughts come in.
Yeah.
Like work on the brain.
Yep.
Get yourself out of the negativity, the thoughts.
Exactly.
I think it's amazing. I think this is just the launch for you, right? You've got your book, you've got these programs, you've got a ton of things that happen. I can't go into, but lots of great things that happen when you're out in LA. So where can people find you? Mm-hmm. Where can they kind of digest more of what you're offering?
Absolutely. So you guys can check me out on social media.
Once you've logged into your social media.
Once I log in, and once I'm during that time block where I can actually respond to messages. Yeah. You can find me on social media at Parmees. So it's Parmees, just _ on Instagram. Facebook is just Parmees Yaz. So my first name and then just the first 3 letters of my last name. I do have a book, as I mentioned. It's called The Peak Performance Advantage: 8 Principles That Fuel Personal and Professional Success, where I go in much deeper on, you know, we only just scratched the surface today. It's available on Amazon on Kindle and also on my website, so they can access me there. And I do offer, you know, certain programs and coaching, like I mentioned as well, if anyone is inspired to want to work with me more one-on-one.
And the website? And
the website, yes, it's parmeespeakperformance.com.
There's a ton of stuff on there.
Lots of articles.
There really is. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that we were able to connect.
Absolutely.
And I have to say too, it's wonderful to see at such a young age. And so I'm just thinking what you've done already, just the impact that you are going to have over the length of your career. It's going to be quite remarkable.
Thank you.
So that's the wrap on Living Your Life with Lianne Laing. I probably should mention share, like, subscribe, let people know that this exists, but we're going to kind of leave it there, and we'll definitely see you back here next week.